All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the world of maitotoxin, a molecule that's, well, let's just say it's as fascinating as it is fearsome.
Yeah, it really highlights just how complex and potent nature can be, Maitotoxin kind of pushes the boundaries of what we thought was even possible.
Absolutely. We've got 5 key points, 5 intriguing factoids about this marine menace, and I have a feeling you're going to be blown away by what we uncovered today. So first up, let's talk about, well, where does this toxin, this colossal toxin, even come from?
Okay, well, it all begins with these tiny single-celled organisms. They're called dinoflagellates, and you find them in marine environments all over the world. And you know what? They're actually responsible for some pretty incredible phenomena.
Like what, you're talking about bioluminescence, those, the amazing displays of light we see in the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. That's them. But they also have a darker side, like they're the culprits behind those harmful algal blooms or what some people call red tides, and those can really wreak havoc on coastal ecosystems and even on human health.
Wow, okay. So these microscopic dynamos, that's where maitotoxin comes from. It makes you wonder, what kind of evolutionary advantage would a toxin this powerful even offer?
That's a great question. And honestly, scientists are still exploring all the different theories out there. I mean, it could be a defense mechanism against predators, right? Or maybe a way to outcompete other organisms for resources. It really is like this constant chemical arms race going on in the ocean with organisms constantly evolving, coming up with these new ways to survive and thrive.
So true. It's a good reminder that even in the vastness of the ocean, it's often those tiniest creatures that pack the biggest punch.
Mm.
And speaking of big, our second factoid focuses on, well, on the sheer size of maitotoxin. It's one of the largest natural toxins ever discovered.
Oh, it really is a behemoth in the molecular world. Like, to put it into perspective, imagine a sugar cube. That's your average molecule, right? Now, picture a skyscraper towering over that tiny cube. That's how massive maitotoxin is compared to other molecules. It's incredible.
Wow, okay. That's an amazing visual. It's like nature just went all out when it came to building this toxin.
Absolutely. And that incredible size is actually a big part of what makes it so difficult for us to study. It's so complex, and scientists are still working hard to unravel all of its secrets.
Okay, well, that leads us perfectly into our third factoid, maitotoxin's extreme potency. I mean, we're talking about a molecule here that can disrupt the balance, that delicate balance of ions within our cells, even in tiny amounts.
Right, and specifically, it targets those calcium ions. They're like these tiny messengers within our cells, and they play a crucial role in almost everything, from muscle contractions to nerve impulses.
So what happens when maitotoxin throws a wrench into that system? What happens then?
Well, it's kind of like throwing a massive party in a carefully organized library. Maitotoxin basically forces open those cellular gates, the ones that are supposed to control the flow of calcium ions, and it just floods the cell, floods it in a way it can't handle.
So it's not just a disruption, it's like it's a total overload.
Exactly. And trust me, it can have some pretty serious consequences. This calcium overload, it can trigger all sorts of things, from muscle spasms to cardiac arrhythmias and even cell death. That's why mastotoxin poisoning can be so dangerous.
Wow, okay, that's scary stuff. And considering those dinoflagellates are part of the marine food web, it makes you think twice about what you're eating, right?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely raises some concerns. A mastotoxin can accumulate in seafood, which can pose a risk to human health, especially if there's been a harmful algal bloom. Luckily, those severe cases of mastotoxin poisoning are relatively rare.
Okay, that is good to hear.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely a reminder to be aware of the potential dangers that could be lurking in our oceans. Okay, so let's move on to factoid number 4. This one really got me thinking. It says that despite its potency and all the havoc it can wreak, maitotoxin's exact mechanism of action is still a mystery.
It's true. We know that it disrupts those calcium ion channels, but we still don't know exactly how it does it. It's like knowing someone broke into a house but not knowing how they picked the lock.
So, like, we're talking about a massive scientific puzzle here.
You got it. It's a huge challenge. Mastotoxin is incredibly complex, and it's very hard to isolate and study, which makes it incredibly difficult to pinpoint exactly how it works, its mode of action.
But like any good mystery, there's a certain allure to it, right?
Mm.
A chance to really push those boundaries of what we know of toxicology and potentially make some really groundbreaking discoveries.
Absolutely. I mean, every challenge is an opportunity to learn, to grow, to innovate. Figuring out the secrets of mastotoxin could lead to all sorts of things: new drugs, new therapies, even better ways to detect and manage those harmful algal blooms.
That's a great point. And that brings us to our final factoid for today. This one highlights a pretty surprising twist, the use of maitotoxin as a scientific tool.
Yeah, that's right. This toxin, it's capable of causing so much damage, but it's actually helping us understand how our cells work. We're using it as a probe to shed light on how ion channels are regulated.
So researchers are using this marine menace to study those cellular gatekeepers,
Yeah,
those ion channels that control the flow of vital ions in and out of cells.
exactly. By looking at how maitotoxin interacts with these channels, we can learn so much more about how they're structured, how they function, and how they contribute to all these different cellular processes.
That is fascinating. It's like having this powerful microscope.
Hmm.
That lets us zoom in and actually see those inner workings of these tiny but essential cellular components.
It really is. And the things we can learn from these studies, they can have such far-reaching implications. We might see new treatments for diseases, those related to ion channel dysfunction, or a deeper understanding of how cells communicate, even new ways to manipulate cellular processes for therapeutic purposes.
That's incredible. So it sounds like our deep dive into maitotoxin has taken us from the depths of the ocean to the very intricate workings of our cells. It's a story of danger, for sure, but also a story of scientific opportunity.
It really shows how interconnected nature is, and it shows the power of science to help us unravel those secrets. And believe it or not, we've only just scratched the surface of this fascinating molecule.
Wow. I can't wait to see what else we uncover as we continue our deep dive into the world of maitotoxin. But for now, I think we should take a little break and come back to explore some more fascinating chemistry, maybe something a little lighter, a little more, cocktail party-ish.
Sounds good to me. I'm always up for a little fun with science. After all, who says chemistry can't be entertaining, right? Okay, so ready to trade that microscope for a martini glass? We're going to explore some chemistry you can actually bring to your next cocktail party.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah.
So are we ditching those lab coats and test tubes for something a little more, fun, a little more relatable?
Yeah, exactly. But don't worry, the science is still there, lurking beneath the surface of all these seemingly simple party tricks. So let's start with something that always gets a good reaction. Gallium.
Gallium. Okay, I think I've heard of it. It's a metal, right? But something tells me there's a bit more to it than that.
Oh yeah, definitely more to it. So gallium is famous for its super low melting point. It melts at just 85 degrees Fahrenheit. You know what that means? It can melt right in your hand.
Wait, seriously. This metal, it'll turn into liquid just from the heat of my hand.
Yep, pretty wild, right? It's like straight out of a sci-fi movie. You hold a piece of gallium and boom, it goes from a solid metal to this silvery liquid. Instant conversation starter.
I bet. But okay, besides being a super cool party trick, does gallium, does it actually have any practical uses?
For sure. Actually, it's a really important ingredient in semiconductors. Those tiny chips that power all our electronics. It's also used in high-temperature thermometers and even some medical applications. So yeah, it's definitely not just a novelty. It's got some serious scientific street cred.
Okay, impressive. All right, so from melting metal, let's move on to something else. How about this? There's this mind-bending factoid about water and salt. It says that if you add salt to a full glass of water, it actually makes the water level go down.
I know, it's weird, right? You'd think adding something to an already full glass would just make it overflow.
Exactly. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, especially if you're trying to, impress your guests with your cocktail making skills.
But trust me, there's some cool science going on here. Basically, it all comes down to those interactions between water molecules and, those tiny little salt ions.
Okay, I'm listening. Explain it to me. How can adding something to water actually make it, decrease in volume?
Okay, so think about it this way. Water molecules, they're naturally attracted to each other, right? So they kind of create this loose network. When you add salt, it dissolves. And those sodium and chloride ions from the salt, they actually sneak into those spaces, those gaps between the water molecules. They actually make the whole arrangement a bit tighter, a bit more compact, which ends up reducing the volume.
So it's not that the water is magically disappearing. It's more like a molecular game of Tetris, with those salt ions finding those perfect little spots to fit in.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's all about how these teeny tiny particles are interacting at the molecular level. And those interactions, well, they can have some pretty surprising results. It's a reminder that there's a lot of hidden complexity in chemistry, even in something as simple as a glass of water.
I'm realizing that even the most basic things can have these incredible secrets. So speaking of secrets, let's move on to another, let's say, cocktail party conundrum. This one's about mixing water and alcohol.
Oh yeah, that one always gets people talking. Like, if you mix equal parts of water and alcohol, you'd think the final volume would be equal to, the sum of the two, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's just common sense. But knowing how tricky chemistry can be, I have a feeling that's not what happens.
You got it. What actually happens is the combined volume ends up being a little less than the sum of the two individual volumes. It's kind of like a magic trick. Like a tiny bit of the liquid vanishes into thin air.
Wait, so where does it go? What happens to that missing volume?
It doesn't really disappear. It's more about how those water molecules and those alcohol molecules, how they kind of get cozy with each other. Water molecules are what we call polar. They have this slightly positive and a slightly negative end. But alcohol molecules, they have a totally different shape, a different distribution of charge. And when they mix, they can actually, well, snuggle up closer to each other than they could with their own kind. So that leads to a smaller overall volume.
Hmm. So it's kind of like those space-saving vacuum bags, but for molecules. It's amazing how something so tiny can have such a big effect.
Right. It really shows how even these super subtle differences in how molecules are structured, it can lead to all these unexpected outcomes. And hey, it's a fun fact to impress your friends with while you're mixing up cocktails.
I'm adding that to my list of party tricks. Okay, so I have to admit, I'm feeling a little thirsty after all this talk about drinks. What do you say we take what we've learned and, actually put some of this cocktail party chemistry to the test, like in the real world?
I'm totally in. A little hands-on experimentation never hurt anyone, especially when there are cocktails involved.
Here's to the wonders of chemistry, both in the lab and at the bar.
Cheers to that, and to always being curious about the world around us, even when we're, sipping on a margarita.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. The cocktails are flowing, and the chemistry is, well, it's still pretty fascinating.
You know it. Even with a little tequila in hand, we can still geek out about molecules and their sometimes very strange behaviors.
For sure. Speaking of strange, I found this factoid that made me laugh.
Hmm.
Apparently, the FDA, they have this secret list of words you absolutely cannot use in drug names.
A secret list. Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of words are we talking about? Like abracadabra and hocus pocus?
Uh-huh. Not quite that exciting. Think more along the lines of, words that promise a bit too much, like cure, safe, or magic. Words that could give people unrealistic expectations about how well a drug actually works.
I see. So it's like the FDA is the language police, protecting consumers from overly optimistic or misleading names.
You got it. It's all about making sure that science is driving drug development, not just marketing hype. Making sure people have accurate information when they're making decisions about their health.
It's pretty interesting. Like, it shows how language and science intersect and how even the words we use can shape how we understand complex things, like medicine.
Totally. It reminds us how important clear communication is, especially when we're talking about our health. And speaking of health, this next factoid, it talks about the connection between our livers and, get this, time.
Okay, now I'm curious. So how does my liver know what time it is? Does it have a tiny clock in there or something?
Not a clock exactly, but it turns out our livers have their own internal clocks, these things called circadian rhythms. And those rhythms actually affect how the liver metabolizes drugs at different times of the day.
Whoa, wait. So my liver's like this tiny timekeeper deciding when my body processes medications.
Exactly. And that's really important for how effective certain drugs are. Some meds actually work best when you take them at specific times, when they're aligned with the liver's internal clock.
Wow, it's like personalized medicine, but taking it a step further. You're not just tailoring the treatment, but you're timing it with the body's natural rhythms.
Right. It really shows that chemistry isn't just about, isolated molecules in a test tube. It's about understanding how those molecules interact in our bodies in these complex and constantly changing systems.
Well said. It's like a perfectly timed dance where every step matters. Okay, so for our last cocktail party chemistry factoid, let's stir up a little controversy, shall we? We're going to talk about cannabinoids, specifically CBD, and its effect on THC.
Ooh, the classic CBD versus THC debate.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the latest from the world of cannabis chemistry?
Well, this factoid says that CBD can actually mess with how THC binds to receptors in the brain. Potentially, it can actually dampen those psychoactive effects of THC.
So CBD, the non-intoxicating one, could actually, put the brakes on THC's high.
Yeah, it's kind of a plot twist. It just goes to show how complex those interactions are between molecules and receptors in our bodies. Even tiny chemical differences can have huge effects.
Totally. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive for today. We've gone from the depths of the ocean, exploring Maitotoxin, to some fun cocktail party chemistry, to some surprising facts about the FDA, our livers, and even the world of cannabis. It's been quite a journey.
It has. I hope you've enjoyed this whirlwind tour of all these chemical curiosities. We hope you'll join us again for another adventure into the amazing world of molecules and reactions.
Absolutely. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and remember, chemistry is everywhere, even in your cocktail glass.
Yeah.
Cheers.